There's something about being able to stay the course through a collective ordeal that is part of a mythic frame. At some point in our lives, our journey, our lives take hold of us. The illusion that we can take hold of our lives disappears, and our lives take hold of us, our circumstances take hold of us. Within the framework of the hero's journey myth, if we navigate far enough into the unknown, we find ourselves at a particular threshold and a place of point of no return. Thresholds are important markers. We've got to encounter them, and they're within us as well as around us, and they create these distinct boundary delineations. They create a contrast, a differentiating and distinguishing between the territories on one side of a marking and another. They inform us that something significant and perhaps confounding is happening, but significant that we can't yet wrap ourselves around. Whenever we encounter a moment in which we become aware of approaching a crossing point, a point of no return, a no going back, these are moments of recognition of having a sense that something is about to change that's beyond my ability to control, or it has just now happened. And something now fundamentally, undeniably, and perhaps unexplainably is about to happen, is about to be different. So this relationship to differentness from how it's been. It's for some of us that we start to panic, and we feel like if we don't try to go back now to what's been most familiar and routine to us, we might never again find our way back. And some of us might have a recognition that whatever it is that we could still go back to, it's no longer worth going back to. It had value at one time, but it no longer has the same function or value. And going forward feels like the only viable option, but we don't know how. And the path isn't clear. And this is the trouble. For others, we have a striking realization that whatever it is that we believe that we once had and wish we could have again, that's gone. That's gone. But the starkest of realizations, I think, is something that we can look at a little more closely, which is whatever it is that we would really wish we could return to and hope to return to, whether it's from the pandemic or from the uprisings, it was never really there to begin with. And I'll be interested in your thoughts about this as well, Bill. It wasn't ever there to begin with. America seems to have a particularly strong nostalgia for things that never were. So all of these realizations help us to make a difficult but necessary reorientation when we cross the threshold, an orientation towards an unknown, where we need the resolve to endure the ordeals that are awaiting us and to be committed to seeing something through and living into it authentically enough to be informed in some new way that's not yet here. So for those of us that have a strength of heart or strength of convictions to acknowledge the frightening reality of our current times, there will be no going back to normal. There won't be that. And some of our more cherished routines and activities, of course, are going to return to us at some point. But the notion that things will again be the way they once were is only a wishful thinking, a fantasy, and an illusion, because there is no such thing as making America great again. So that was the context for the conversation that we can have, and wanted to see where you felt like you wanted to jump in, Bill.
Okay. I'm going to jump in from a different spot than I thought I was going to jump in when you first asked me to do this. So it has to do with, crossing a threshold and encountering differentness. About 15 years ago that I decided to move from our house out in the country where I raised my kids into the city, and moved into a neighborhood that was and is predominantly Black and marginal. the time I moved in, it was just beginning to come out of 20 years of being just a flat out violent ghetto. And I'd heard that the community was working to rebuild itself. And I thought, I'm going to move into the city, move into a neighborhood that where there's some work to be done. I was both naive and grandiose in terms of my fantasy about the experience. And so suddenly I found myself really, in some ways, for the first time. I mean, I've been used to being sort of the other in my professional world, but here now, in the neighborhood where I was living, I was the other. You know, a white gay professional suddenly moving into a predominantly Black neighborhood. And I immediately joined the community group and spent probably 3 or 4 years listening and learning, dealing with a lot of anxiety. The neighborhood at that time was really dangerous, and overcoming a constant urge to withdraw. Just leave. What the hell was I thinking about? And gradually finding ways of becoming part of the community. And eventually became president of the Citizens Board, the community board, for about 10 years. And with a really remarkable group of people, different races, different religions, classes, who were committed to working together, and where the work of the community was more important than individual needs, individual prides. So I learned a tremendous amount through being in this community, and all the different forces of the threats of something different, and the threat of otherness, the othering, where the other is oversimplified and turned into a kind of caricature. I was telling Mike earlier an experience just recently here, and we've been having some renovation done in our offices. There was a subcontractor doing some work in the building, and one of the workers had parked his truck in front of our offices, and on the back of the truck was a Confederate flag and a white power symbol. So there were several calls to the office complaining about the truck being in front of the office. And our executive director, who is himself white, most of the staff are Black, went to the contractor and said, that guy's got to move his truck. We don't want that truck parked in front of our building. And that was a very tense encounter. And finally, the guy that that owned the truck moved it. It came back threatening and saying, you have no business telling me where I can park my truck, and I may be coming back with some of my buddies in the next few days. Simultaneously with that, someone in the neighborhood took a photograph of the truck parked in front of the office, put it on Facebook, saying the Bloomfield-Garfield Corporation has hired a white racist. So that went through the neighborhood. So then suddenly we had some of the Black residents in the neighborhood also threatening to hold a demonstration in front of the building. So that's the level of the tension and the flashpoints these days that are frightening, and they're dangerous, and and of course fostered by social media, which is the emptiest form of human communication that we've developed so far. So with that story in the background, I kind of step back from the kind of immediate pressures that we're all struggling with, I think, and just to talk about at least my understanding of what moves people toward violence, what moves people toward the kind of thinking that is so absolute, so split. And there's, as human beings, at our most basic psychological level, we have a profound need for recognition and a profound need for structure, psychological structure and environmental structure. And when one or both of those are absent, we become anxious. And when we become anxious, if we're lucky and we've had a really good developmental history and nice life and all that sort of stuff, we can manage our anxiety on our own. For most of us, that's actually not been the case. So when we become anxious, our need for recognition, our need for understanding, and our need for structure presses forward. I can't sustain my own psychological and emotional structure. I can't do it internally. I can't do it for myself. I need something from the outside, from the environment, to help me out. Growing up, we look to our families, we look to our parents to provide, that kind of structure, reliability, predictability. Some of us are luckier in that territory than others. And, when we grow up in an environment that proves to be more unreliable than reliable, we end up with a very, very ambivalent attitude toward the people around us. We end up with distrust, some of it conscious, I think a lot of it unconscious. And over the years, in my work as a psychotherapist, I've learned a lot about the nature of aggression from Winnicott. Winnicott wrote about aggression. He wrote about what he called the antisocial tendency, and particularly in the context of adolescence. But when we're in trouble, when something feels out of control, when we're anxious, the tendency is to push against the other, to push against the environment. In Winnicott's words, to make the environment important again. Okay. To say to the environment, it may be a family, it may be a friend, it may be, a spouse, it may be the school system, maybe the government. Something's wrong. Do something. Okay. Somebody's got to do something. I can't do it by myself.
That's really striking what you're saying about making the environment important again, to think about it like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, paradoxically, if I use our neighborhood as an example, um, you know, um, the wealthy environments have the best police protection. Okay, um, and here in this marginalized, poor African American community, first of all, the police weren't seen as a resource.
Right.
Like the last thing you do is call a cop.
Right.
Okay. We had to change that culture. So it meant meeting regularly with the police. It meant teaching people in the community, every time something goes wrong, call 911. Every time something goes wrong, demand help. And completely changed the relationship between the community and the police. We have a community now where 4 of the officers in the community are unarmed, and their policing is showing up at all the community events, so people get to know them and the kids get to know them, and they're seen as a resource rather than a threat. So and I think, as I look at what's going on now, and I think what's been going on for a long time, when the environment is not responsive, people are thrown into one of 2 positions. One of withdrawal and collapse, and I don't give a fuck, why bother? Which in its extreme becomes a deep, deep sense of depersonalization, dehumanization, or people become violent. In my late teens, I've been a prick a long time in my life until some extensive psychotherapy. But when I was a teenager, I finally ended up in jail and looking at a fairly long prison sentence. I had a really good attorney, strictly by chance, who managed to get my trial led by a judge who he had a lot of respect for. And the judge said to me, "You're a very angry young man," which I couldn't dispute that. The evidence was against me. So the evidence of the crimes are also against me. So, it's just like, but anyway, he said to me, most of the people who wind up in front of my bench are angry. He said, unlike a lot of the people who end up in front of my bench, you could do something. And so there was no prison sentence. He assigned me to bench probation, which meant I met with him rather than a probation officer. And he said, you got 2 years. Do something with your intelligence. Do something with your anger that's useful. Okay. So I had a response from the environment that was constructive. Okay. No bullshit. And I also was absolutely clear that if I didn't take him seriously and I fucked up again, I'd been in the penitentiary. So that's when the environment becomes responsive. And we're in a situation now, I think, on a national scale, and I see this in other countries. I teach a lot in England and Italy and France, and all of whom are struggling with this very similar dynamics. And, huge portions of the population are feeling left out. They're feeling ignored. Then they are, in fact, depersonalized. And I do it myself. I think, we get caught up in our, left-wing liberal, self-righteousness. We demonize people. We cut off our capacity to consider what their lives are. We become part of the environment that, leaves people out in the cold. And certainly last week in Washington, we saw one of the results of that with a level of violence and in a bizarre combination, really, of despair and violence. Yeah. I had a discussion with a colleague a couple of days ago. He's my age, professional, with the Vietnam era. And he said an incredibly remarkable thing. He said, I was glued to the television last Wednesday watching, horrified and then furious and thinking to myself, what the fuck is wrong with these people? And then he said, all of a sudden, I broke down in tears and I was weeping. And I just began thinking, oh my God, these broken little boys, these broken little boys, broken, ignored, and like fodder, for this psychopath president. And as far as I'm concerned, a lot of the other people in the government, but and is just a stunning reaction, and I think a lot of painful truth in it. So I'll pause.
Yeah, just to let that move through. I was in a online session yesterday with a woman who has had a chronic and lifelong struggle with her mother. They're in Argentina. They have the whole circumstances happening there. And, she had returned for the holidays and extended holiday time to be there, and found herself once again completely infuriated with her mother's failure, environmental failure of her, and I think legitimately so. And she's come into the point where it bothers her how much she can't stand her mother, and where it leaves her internally time and again. And of course, then where it leaves her with herself and her feeling of her own self-worth. And I introduced that very thing, Bill, the idea that, have you ever thought that your mother might be broken, as opposed to simply withholding and refusing to give you something that she could give you? That something in her was broken, and broken long, long, long ago, and never will ever be, for her or for you. And the level of sorrow that started to well up, and she couldn't wrap herself around. I mean, she was speechless and unexplainably troubled in a whole new way. And I got a note in the email, today saying, I think I get it. Now, of course, it's going to be a long road of the new possibility, but I think that's what I'm wondering about, like the ways that when we're all either anxious or reactive, how we don't want to look at something, like how we don't want to look, and how broken people actually are. And I think then, when you throw in what the media can do, and with the power of images to both make something known to you wouldn't have known, but also portray it in a way that is actually a part of the trouble, to create the exhibitionism, or we can put the right figures on the screen to show how crazy people are and how dark or evil people are, that supports our postures of them. That would never, those aren't images that would make you say, oh, now there's a guy I think I better talk to.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I also think at some point in our conversation, we can turn towards, the background, I think from Bolas's historical perspective of Western civilization, right? And our capacity for war. And, particularly over the last century, mass destruction, and our inability to grieve, and our inability to understand our own participation in it as a perpetrator or a victim of that.
Yeah.
That very thing you described, where, we either withdraw or dissociate or collapse or quit or drop out around those realities, and depersonalize the victims of any kind of violence, right? And certainly our own participation in it.
Yeah, and I think that's, Bolas brings in another whole perspective that's it's incredibly rich, and and for me profoundly disturbing, in its implications, because he talks about the impact of loss and the inability to recognize and accompany loss and grief, to mourn. And we thought, for those of us from the Vietnam era, I can remember a few years ago, Martin Scorsese put out this brilliant documentary on Dylan. And, as I watched it, and Dylan's one of my heroes, watched it, and I was just like so moved and breaking down at times, crying, remembering the hope and this sort of genuine belief that we were revolutionizing society, and that after Vietnam there would never be another war. I absolutely believed after the tragedy of Vietnam, this country could not possibly go to war again. And when the documentary finished, I just wept. It's as though we didn't learn anything. And, when 9/11 happened, had this country and had George Bush been capable of leading the country in mourning the loss, we could have, that was another time, another opportunity for a profound change. And instead we went to war. A war that's still going on, a war that has been just so tragic. And, this country has lost every war since World War II. And we act as though that's not real. We act as though that has not had an impact on, the fabric of the country. It's part of what I'm sure fuels the Make America Great Again. It's like, in Bolas's language, it's the manic refusal to stop. It's the manic refusal to mourn. It's and in the manic response, it's an unhealthy aggression. It's not a healthy aggression. So, and then I think this is pivotal now. I mean, I hope that Biden and Harris, and Biden is, I think, our first president in a long time who comes from a genuinely working class.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
A long time since we've had any leadership that was genuinely working class.
That would be realistically able to consider the lives of.
Yeah, and communicate to them, communicate with them, listen. It's the need for genuine recognition. It's so easy again in the media. These sweeping generalizations of the far right and white nationalists, and again it creates a certain kind of caricature where then we can hate them or dismiss them or demean them. And there is something in this protest that needs to be taken seriously. Not how they're doing it, but my God, 70 million people voted for Trump. Something's not getting heard. So,
and I don't know what how you would frame this, but when we think about some of what, like, we have work to do, and what are we capable of doing? What do we do so that we're not just feeling the same kind of helpless impotence or throwing our hands up in the air? And, in terms of inner work, the distinguishing between the capacity to have and to hold, to contain, to be angry, and angry with versus angry at the target. The ability to do that, and speaking to what it takes to have that kind of effort to not dismiss a genuine feeling, but to contain it and to bring life to it and to contribute versus to discharge it, quit, withdraw, attack. And what was so maddening to me watching, this alternating, literally polarization, like a battery pulls between hope and excitement that we're addressing the problem, and then watching in horror on both sides, watching this attempted accountability be riddled with blame, and this righteousness to make me think, oh my God, like we're just shooting past the targets at one another. The ground of where the work is, and not even realizing that we're doing it. And like, what can we call into question more about our own posture from wherever we are on the wheel, or wherever we're positioned around this trouble? And how do you spoke to that earlier at the start, aggression versus hostility, and how they're actually not the same.
They're not the same. Yeah, I mean, aggression is an effort to call upon the environment, to call upon the other, do something. Violence is when there's basically a loss of hope of the environment, and it's just simply to destroy or hurt the other, for being unresponsive, for making my life more difficult rather than better. And it's like, in a certain way, with the client you were just talking about, her hatred is a form of violence. It cuts off the relationship. It cuts off any opportunity to have a more complicated understanding of her mother. um, and the understanding that things happened in her mother's life that certainly might have had some effect on her, but it, at their core, really had absolutely nothing to do with her.
Right.
And that's a hard edge to hold. It's because they're both true.
Exactly. Yeah. Like for any projection to hold, right, it needs some kind of truth in it. It has to match up in some way.
Yeah.
With your projection. But then the fuel that comes. We'll see here if there are any people that would like to just share what they're wrestling with and want to get a fresh perspective on it, a way of looking at it. So I know this isn't the easiest of topics, but I don't think that will stop some of us who would really like to have a chance to share what's happening and what you're thinking about and what you're really wrestling with or wanting to wrestle with better. Just type into the chat and we'll how to hold so much hostility when you're confronted with it. To withdraw and protect. I think we're always looking to protect ourselves from anything we perceive as threatening, right? Once we perceive it to be the threat, you go, why so much threat? So we'll wait, as we're waiting for some of you to type into the chat that you want to come on and share something or ask something, and find your way to that. I mean, what else do we do? Like how do you authentically actually decide you want to know someone's story or listen in some way? Like you said, the ignored. How would we actually be willing to do it? And I wrestle with that. I mean, myself. How do we not all wrestle with that? About I think that some of the people that I know from my life, I have some investment in their different point of view. I don't think I want to talk with Jim Jordan, or would find that valuable at this point. But David Brooks had a column this week where he talked about you've got to be discerning. You've got to separate the threads of people who are other than you and address that. Yeah. Sahid, if you think you'd like to come on, I think it'd be great to come on and share some of what you wrestle with. Sahid is asking about defining, again, the difference between aggression and hostility. And I'm going to get Helena to come on in the meantime. So he's wanting to know, like, what is that difference between aggression and hostility?
Well, if we take the literal meaning of aggression, the literal meaning of aggression is the capacity to move out and to move toward. So aggression in and of itself, is the capacity to say, I'm here. I'll give you a very funny example, but last time my grandson was here, Abel, who was like 6 at the time. Yeah, he was 6, maybe going on 7. And Mick and I got busy planning a day for him. We were going to take him out on an adventure. And so we were filling him in on our plans for the day. And he listened politely. And he said, well, Grandpa, I have a different idea. And I expect to be taken seriously. That's aggression. Simple, straightforward.
It's striking, isn't it?
And it's hard. It's really simple. Okay. And when you're taken seriously, that's you live in that world, you know? It's just ordinary.
Yeah, you just jogged a memory for me of my niece doing something similar when she was like 8 and very precocious. She was the only child sitting at the adult table, and about a half an hour into the conversation, she said, "Excuse me, I have been listening the whole time. I think I should get a chance to share."
Yeah, right. Exactly.
But oh, someone here has some social realization.
Yeah.
But feeling ignored. Right?
Yeah. And then imagine what happens if, a kid says something like that and they're told to shut up.
I know. Some of us know what happened.
Yeah, we do know, or they're slapped or they're beaten,
Right.
Then that aggression, it's like what gets embodied around an effort to express, oneself is a sense of danger. Either the need, withdrawal is a form of hostility, withdrawal is a form of violence. And attack is a form of violence. They're both violent reactions to the repeated experience that it's not safe for me to make myself known. Aggression is, making myself known, making my needs known.
That's really helpful to say that, and I think we'll come back to this. I'm going to hear from Helena here, but in the chat, people are saying that the word aggression, like sexuality, is a charged term in terms of what starts to be attributed to it from moral perspectives.
Yeah.
Helena, what's stirring?
You got something stirring with the kids stuff.
Yes.
My kid yesterday decided that he doesn't like how he's treated. So his strategy is he went sledding and he said that he lost memory because he hit his head. And now we need to start all over again telling him the rules. So he's asking, he's trying to get, because he's supposed not to have TV for 2 days. What is TV? Can you show it to me? So he's doing all these really, really clever things to get, because he doesn't remember what he did wrong. So he should not be punished.
Brilliant.
I was thinking how, it's not to the level of Trump, but in a way, this is all forgotten. I'm now a different person. I didn't do anything bad. I'm just, now we are starting new. Teach me. So that's what you invoked. But the other point that you really made me think of, Michael knows I was in ex-Yugoslavia in Croatia. And basically seeing what's happening in DC brings so many memories of Milosevic, who was doing the same thing, telling his people, I'm your big father, no one's gonna beat you, I'm gonna protect you, making them into victims while they were the ones coming after others. So it was really scary seeing, because I had 2 friends that were journalists that day at Capitol. And them, luckily, going through the war, they know how to handle this situation, because they were verbally and physically attacked. What surprised them was that the police did nothing. So that point that they allowed people to come in, they allowed even their equipment to be destroyed, and that didn't even invoke the police, made them, the lady said, confused. I asked her, does that remind her of something? And she said, of Yugoslav army, who stood on the sides and then took sides with the aggressors. Okay, this. So when you were talking about the ability to hold and awareness that communication is needed, and I'm coming, Luca. soon I will
Worried
have
about
to
what
go.
that strange device in the other room is. He still had an answer to his question.
So I just wanted to bring, yes, the awareness and hope that you will find a way to humanize each other, to recognize it, because it is scary to see such a polarization,
Yeah.
such a lack of understanding, and somehow just the awareness that Joe Biden is who he is, that looks like he has capacity, brings hope.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's from my side.
Thank you.
Thanks, Helena.
Bye.
We'll go help you. You go orient him to what day and time it is.
Yeah.
The brilliance of children, huh?
Really.
You know, with a little bit of the time that we have left, though, Lee was asking about how do we make sure we don't become too dissociated, and wondering, like, to think, well, how would we better recognize, our dissociative tendency, and understand that in the same way that we look at understanding the violent tendency and the attack, that seeing that, or, when we were talking the other day, just recognizing, oh, this withdrawal in me, it's so ego syntonic. I wouldn't even recognize it as a part of the ambivalent aspect of retreating from the thing that I need help from.
Mhm. I mean, I think, dissociation, clearly is a means of self-protection, often more unconscious and automatic than conscious and intentional. It's another form of withdrawal. And, I think it's a challenge to be aware of our limits. How much can we take in at any given time? How much can we process? And there's the emotional processing, the internal processing, and then there's the question of what kind of meaningful action can we take, and I think that's essential. My work in our community here is a very small piece, but I have some sense of agency, and I'm in a community that just refused to stop disintegrating, and refused to stop turning to violence. And it was an active refusal, and it's taken almost 2 decades. But now we live in a viable community, a very viable community, and it took work with housing, getting a grocery store into the neighborhood, supporting the kids after school, as I talked about earlier, getting the police in the community. These are all different parts of what makes a community viable. It's what makes a community responsive. So when people are in trouble, there's someone to turn to. We have a community, Neighbors in Need fund, for example, where somebody can't pay their rent, they can call and say, could you please pay my rent this month? There's no, send in your, income tax statement to prove that you need the money. The money is there, and people don't take advantage of it. During the early days of the shutdown in here, the whole neighborhood organized to get food to people. Local restaurants gave meals free. That's what creates a community that's responsive. We've done it here on a small scale, and that's hopefully what we'll begin seeing happening at a national scale again. But I think part of what, for me, how I avoid dissociating is this level of engagement and action that means something, that I feel is productive. And so when we have a place to stay engaged, where we have a sense of agency, I think it decreases our need to dissociate. It decreases the need to withdraw.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So,
Saeed,
yeah.
Thank you.
this topic has got to be stirring in you.
It is actually my heart is pumping. I wanted to thank you for letting me thank Bill for the in person. Bill, what you are talking about is just going through every cell in my body and vibrating me because
Saeed, can you just up your volume a bit?
Yeah.
I think I would just come closer. I don't know how to increase it. Is it better now?
Yeah, that's good.
You said something about recognition and structure, the need that we all have for that, and then how we relate to this, either through hostility or aggression, and then we either become apathetic and or want to destroy. And that's the story of me as a person at a micro level. And it's me, my story at a macro level, and what happened to Iran 40 years ago. I have lost connection with my family, with my sister, who we used to love each other and be part of each other, because I expected her to, because I didn't recognize her and didn't give her any recognition, and just referred her back to her because of her mental health issues, rather than really trying to understand her and try to work something out with her. So my hostility toward her became aggression, and then it expressed itself with 10 years of cutting off and not really relating to her at all. It was her problem, not mine. Mm-hmm. And I have the same, problems in my other relationships, including people that I work with. 40 years ago, Iran wanted to take charge of its own, direction, didn't want to sell its oil so cheap, and the West didn't want to recognize that, so Shah is gone, and as a result, that hostility that was between Iran and the West became a complete open aggression, and we all have seen what happened. In millions of people in the Middle East have suffered because that island of stability and what we had disappeared. And Bill, I thank you for this, because I can see today why nothing has worked, because I have become apathetic, because I have said, you know what, it's not my problem anymore. I don't care anymore. And the result has been complete isolation of myself. And I know that someday I will not be here anymore and haven't achieved anything. Maybe the better way is to actually recognize people and give them the recognition that they want, that they're seeking, rather than try to refer them to themselves, and they should know better. They should take care of it. Thank you. That's why I asked you to explain to me that hostility versus aggression. And you mentioned something about your nephew or some young person in your life. And I was actually thinking in my other thoughts, and I apologize for this. That if you could give me that example one more time, so I can write it in my heart.
Okay. The example of the judge, you mean?
Yeah, no, that was actually very powerful. That just a few minutes ago you mentioned about what was that? Your niece or
grandson?
Oh, grandson. Yes.
My grandson. Oh, tell that one again with pleasure.
Yes, if you don't mind.
Okay. Yeah.
I think Thanks, Saeed.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, it was, my partner Mick and I were telling Abel about our plans for the day with him. We'd planned this special day, what our idea of a special day. So we were filling him in on our plans, and he listened politely. And then I still remember he kind of crossed his arms, and looked kind of seriously, and he said, "Well, Grandpa, I had a different idea about today, and I expect to be taken seriously."
Okay.
That was
So that is that hostility, or is that
aggression? That is aggression. So,
that's aggression. Oh my God!
That
I'm very aggressive in that sense.
yeah.
Then what would be hostility? How could she or he would be grandson? How would he be able to be showing some hostility toward not aggression?
Well, I mean, if he'd been raised differently, then like a hostile response on his part might have been, "I don't want to do that. I'm not going," and and then having a big fight about whether he has to go or not, and I don't want to go, and leave me alone, and give me my iPad, leave me alone. That's a hostile response, or I could have responded hostilely and saying, "Who the hell do you think you are? I'm in charge here. I make the plans. You have my kind of fun,
So let me understand this. So is hostility the right way and aggression the wrong way, or
no, the other way around?
The other way around. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So that now makes sense. But that's what I was confused about. Is that which one is which? Yeah, okay. Yeah. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, everyone, for listening to my story too.
Thanks, Saeed.
Thank you.
Well, Bill, we're getting near a time to be wrapping up.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I wonder, looking back on from the start and how we had fresh trouble. One of the guys was writing here in the chat, like, I was angry because the technology wasn't working. Yeah.
And
that can go either way.
It started working. So
then there's those who got angry once it started working, right? But that how evocative that term is, right? I think partly the term aggression has been how it's been maybe historically used, but I think when we hear that term on a body level, it would speak to the confusion we all carry in the core of our being about our own experience of it as girls and boys the age of your grandson, who when we look to assert our aggressive, I'm here, I want something with you, and you need to do something about that.
Yeah.
The confusion and the anxiety that's also woven into our bodies because of how fundamentally and pervasively wrong that went for many of us. So
yeah.
That to disturb the environment.
Yeah. Not all environments welcome that.
No. The ability to be received as well, but I appreciate your willingness to come on and just drop in here and give us all something to be thinking about going forward. And I was wondering, as we wrap up, if something is standing out to you as a result of all of this.
Yeah, something. One last thing I'd like to mention. I sent you that book review essay that I would really like you to send out to people, because the one book was Bolas's book on meaning and melancholia, but the other is a book by Arlie Hochschild, who was a sociologist from Berkeley, wrote a book called Strangers in Their Own Land. And it's one of the most important books I've read in the last 2 or 3 years. She's a white sociologist, obviously from Berkeley, liberal, blah, 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 all of her left-wing liberal credentials fully intact. And she lived with poor white families in Louisiana for 3 years, getting to know their lives, their cultures. These are people that would be considered racist and white nationalists. And it's a book that is both compassionate and critical. And that's so hard to find reading. Has both of those capacities, to be critical in a thoughtful way and compassionate. I took two things from it. One was I really learned something about, in terms of, again, crossing that threshold, and to be able to genuinely respect something that's different than me, and how to listen. And it really humanized for me an understanding that I sort of knew intellectually, but hearing the stories that she tells in that book about people's lives, I can't demonize what's happening with, what we now call white nationalists, or, the far right wing. At least it's just radically shifted my capacity to understand. Really, really encourage people to read that book. So.
And it's hard won to find any way for us to feel that we can reestablish a collective or common ground or a commonwealth. And the passage that you listed from her book, from Hochschild's book, was that economically, culturally, demographically, politically, you are suddenly a stranger in your own land. And I think probably many of us know that feeling at the core of our being, in the most primal sense of our own families, and the way we carry that unconsciously, and are, I think, in danger of playing that out if we're not more considered and thoughtful in our responses.
Yeah.
So thank you.
You're welcome. One hell of a complicated topic you put out there this time, Mike.
Yeah. It's only because it's what seems to be everywhere.
It is everywhere. So, and it's damned important to have ways to think about it. So,
yeah. Thanks for giving us some ways to think about it, Bill.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right. I'll sign you off here.
Okay.
See you.
Yep.
That was Bill Cornell. You can look at some of his works of self-examination and psychotherapy and psychoanalysis. If you want to post that up there, the links to the books are being posted. And to thank you all for being here. And if you're looking for a way to travel yourself going forward, we are in the middle of a collective ordeal right now. It's not going away. It's going to continue. All past inauguration day in our country, well past into the spring for the pandemic, where all the upheaval is. And we'll be creating an ensemble hero experience to get online. And Anna or Janet, if you can post that link for those of you who would like to be a part of that, or need to be a part of that. We're going to do our best to be an environment that can respond and engage and wrestle with these important matters, both in how we have more clarity in our mind, and compassion in our approach, and then to take considered action. We do reaches where we challenge ourselves and one another to extend ourselves into levels of engagement that feel productive. That Bill's speaking, that feels so vital. Yeah, great. Just got the link up there. So that's the link to the Ensemble Hero. And again, our task here is not necessarily to provide answers, but to provide doorways doorways that promote new thinking, new ways of considering things, and understanding the way we contribute to the troubles so that we can alter our own position and respond to these new ways as they come. Thank you all. This is great, Jan. Thanks for being there, all of you. Yep, Ben. Although you can type in the chat any, what stands out for you as well. We also have our monthly inspirations where you can receive from us updates with what's happening, and we can post that as well. You're welcome, Kim, Eva. Thanks, Eva, for coming. Beth, as always, good to have you. You can type in your own responses to everybody. Sasha, we're doing the best we can with what we've been given. And so we'll end with what Meg Wheatley would say, that there are two fundamental questions we have now. Two fundamental questions. It's simply, what is now possible? We have to hold up that, like, what is now possible that wasn't possible before? And who are the people who are there? Who are the people that care? Who cares? Right? What's possible? Who are the ones that care? And let's keep ourselves as among those people. Thank you, everybody. And we'll see you next time on Essential Conversation.